I'm Caitlin and welcome to the Lit Review. Today we are doing my June wrap-up for 2020 and I have a lot to talk about, much more than I thought I was going to because I thought it was going to be a pretty limited reading month, but I ended up spreading my wings and expanding a little bit more than I thought. But first, let's get into the stats for this month because I just love the stats of it all. So I read 9 books this June and that means I read 3,272 pages. What? I didn't listen to any audiobooks this month, so that means 0 hours listened, but my average rating was a 3.8, which is a bit higher than I was expecting, although when I look at all of these books stacked up in front of me, I think there's some really, like life changers in front of me. So I'm pretty happy about that. In general, when I talk about my audience, I read 7 adult books and 2 young adult books, no new adult books. And then my top 3 genres for the month were nonfiction, fantasy, and historical fiction. So quick note on formatting, I read, again, 0 audiobooks this month. I read 2 ebooks and 7 physical books. And of those 9 books total, 7 of them were ones that I owned, which, huzzah, getting through that awful high number of unread books on my TBR, and I borrowed 2 of them. So not too shabby, but let's get into my ratings. I had 1 DNF at the very beginning of the month, and I'm not counting that DNF towards my stats of 9 because I didn't get far enough into it for me to really feel like I could count it. So technically there are 10 things that I'm going to be talking to you about, but 9 of them I actually read. So 1 DNF, 0 1 star, 0 1.5 stars, 0 2 stars, 1 2.5 star, 1 3-star rating, 2 3.5 stars, and there might be more. I'm still hemming and hawing about 1, but we'll get into that. 2 4-star ratings, 2 4.5-star ratings, and 1 5-star. So as I'm going through all of these books and telling you my feelings on them, I am also going to be sorting them into keep, maybe, or no. So I like to do this because it helps me kind of triage my own overloaded bookshelves. So the things that I really enjoyed, I plan on keeping. The maybes are, hey, I kind of need some more time to figure out how I feel about them. And the no's are just that, they're no's. And so I will go through each of those last 2 categories of boxes once I have filled them up and make final decisions on them. But I will also be telling you throughout this video whether or not I'm keeping something or whether or not it's potentially going. But let's get into it. So I'm going to start with my DNF because it's actually the first thing I attempted to read this past month in June, and it was a ebook of Date Me Baby One More Time by Stephanie Rowe. This was a reread for me. It was kind of like my wanting to do a little bit of a comfort read. So my memory of it was that it was this really quirky romance between the immortal guardian of the Fountain of Youth and the mortal man who is desperate to get his hands on it because he thinks it'll break a curse that's been on his family. Back when it was released in like 2006, I gave it 4 stars. This time around I DNF'd it. The things that I remember in my head as being like really quirky and silly, this time around did not come off well. It came off so dumb and like sexist and lacking in depth, and it just made me very sad. So I created a whole new shelf on my Goodreads that now says this did not age well, and so far it's just this book. But I'm going to potentially be filling that up as I revisit some old favorites. And it just made me really sad that I DNF'd this book, but sometimes things need to just stay in our memory as like that first experience for who we were in 2006, because clearly the things that I used to find really charming about this, I no longer find charming. So such is life. So then the other thing I started reading, my first official read book of June, was My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. And I ended up giving that book 4 stars. It is, as advertised by many, a tough read because it focuses on the title character, Vanessa, who we're joining Vanessa in her head through multiple timelines of her life. The present day, where she's in her 30s and is dealing with other students from her former private school coming forward and saying that this teacher was inappropriate and like sexually assaulted them on, you know, varying degrees of sexual assault. And one in particular keeps coming and reaching out to Vanessa saying like, please, I know you have a history of this too. Please stand up and corroborate this with me. And Vanessa, as an adult, is deeply uncomfortable with that because she sees herself as having had a romance with this professor, with this teacher in her boarding school. And so you cut back and forth to how that relationship began, how it continued to progress, and you really do see it even through young Vanessa's eyes. Like, she's very resistant to it, but you as a reader realize that she was being groomed and that it was a deeply inappropriate relationship. And really the emotional journey that you're on in this book with Vanessa is her coming to terms with realizing that this wasn't a romantic thing. This was a long-term trauma, and it's a really emotionally difficult read, but it was very well executed in my opinion. I know for several people out there, just the mere hint of grooming is going to be a hard pass, and that's okay. Just know that going into it, you are going to get a lot of sex scenes in this book, and they're not sexy. They are non-sexy sex scenes because you are just horrified that it's happening, but it is a very serious part of what happened to Vanessa and a very serious part of how she processes or longs for another time in her life. And so it's very uncomfortable and really difficult, but very impactful. I really enjoyed it. It was still an uncomfortable read, which is why I'm not giving it 5 stars. But it was really well executed, and I'm glad to have read it to be part of like the larger booktube book community conversation about it. But yeah, so I would really not say that this one's for everybody. Aggressively, I would not say that that one's for everybody. But I do think if you're game, you can check out My Dark Vanessa and really get an impactful reading experience out of it. So My Dark Vanessa was something that I checked out from my local library, and I'm really glad to have read it, but I don't feel the need to purchase it, so I won't be keeping that one. And so after reading that one, I kind of wanted like a bit of a palate cleanser. I wanted something that was a bit like fun and light and not asking too much of me in terms of my emotions. So I picked up one of my 5-star prediction novels, which was Obsidio by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. And so I have been really loving the Illuminated Files. I've been reading them in like distant chunks. I'm really bad about reading series like in a timely manner. So this was my outstanding part of reading that series. I really enjoyed it. I gave this a 5-star just because it was such a pleasant reading experience. Like maybe it's just because I needed the like boost of endorphins after reading My Dark Vanessa, but this was just a lot of fun. Yes, it was predictable. There are things you can see coming a mile away in this novel because you have kind of like through the other 2 books learned kind of the patterns, and you know, there are some assumptions that you can make knowing those patterns, but I still just really enjoyed it. I really think there's not many series out there that can successfully do what Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff do in terms of like this mixed media campaign. So the Illuminated Files really are a series of case files. You just know that there are mysterious individuals that are part of the Illuminate group who are taking the corporation who destroyed the mine to task in an intergalactic court. And you get to know and figure out who some of those individuals are through each of the books, and they focus on very different characters, and there's always a little bit of a romance in these. There's always like a little bit of a connection. There's also throughout the whole series there are things like wormholes and murderous AI and secondary invasions, and so it's just they're always really action-packed, and they keep you on the edge of your seat, particularly if you're willing to just like let it go and buy in. You know, like the predictability did not bother me with this because I was just like willing to buy into it. I wanted to go on an adventure, and this book let me go on an adventure. And they're all, again, told in kind of this case study format. So this is like, they'll do things like have countdowns throughout each of the books, which helps build tension towards these events. And it's just really fun. I think of the 3 relationships, this one is actually like my least favorite of the 3 little romances, but I still had such a good time with the overall book. It still made me tear up a little bit. It still made me gasp in certain areas, and like I just really, really enjoyed it. So this is pretty obviously a keeper. It's a high star rating for me, so, and it's part of a series that I really like, so keeping this. Then what I ended up doing was for a, what was it? It was Feel Good-a-thon. For Feel Good-a-thon, I decided to do a completely different book and also to buddy read with one of my friends here on BookTube, Kaylani Simply Me. So we decided, we've been wanting to buddy read for a really long time, and both of us had this book and were interested in it, so I had such a good time with Obsidio that I popped right into Nevernight by Jay Kristoff, starring Mia Corvair, who is a 16-year-old assassin-to-be. She goes to an assassin school to be an assassin. Like, why was that hard? So she's 16 years old and she goes to this kind of hidden elite assassin school because she is on a quest for revenge. And so this book kind of follows her first year in training to be an assassin. This is the book that I am most likely to flip-flop on my rating. Currently, I have it as a 4-star. So let's talk about why I might give it a 4-star before I yank some of that away. I ended up really enjoying the writing style, but it took me a while to get there. At first, this book has some, like you can kind of see here, there are footnotes at the bottom of many of these pages, and they're often like historical asides or like random commentary. But at first I thought that was like really jarring. And I actually felt like the first couple of chapters were really self-serving and I didn't like the voice at all. And I was just like, okay, we're gonna push through this. I hear so much good stuff. Everybody hypes this book up. There's gotta be something. And it did get there eventually. Like, I did get caught up in like the adventure plot of it all. And this has some tropes in it that they're catnip to me. I can't help it. Like the lady badass in this case, she wants to be a lady assassin. Like, I can't say no to it. It also has one of my other like really niche tropes or things that I just like in books, which is when there's a magical talking animal, particularly if it's a cat. I'm sorry, I grew up on Tamora Pierce with Alana the Lioness and Faithful. You give me a talking cat, I'm in. So Mr. Kindly is Mia's like talking shadow cat, and I live for Mr. Kindly. I'm a sucker, I can't help it. So like, it has some really specific things in it that I just eat up. And I really, once those elements got going and I got to connect to the characters a little bit more, I started getting into and looking forward to those footnotes. It really was a ride that I was just happy to be on. Now, why I'm still here dithering after almost a month of having finished this book and tempted to give it a 3.5 star. So I enjoyed this. I would like to continue to read the series. However, there are some concerns that I have about Monsieur Christophe's writing that I just can't put away. Like, first of all, I'm gonna link Read with Cindy's video to you on this because she handles this hilariously. All of the things she brings up in that book, I'm like, yeah, that's not great. I hear you. Like, she's not wrong. And that doesn't mean you still can't find joy in it. She'll even say, she's like, if you enjoyed it, cool, I hope you laughed at this video. So like, it's not like high dramas or anything. It's not like crazy drama. But the couple of things that just made me, I think I said in my vlog where I read this, where I was just like, yeah, I don't like it. And what I mean when I do, is that it takes me out of the book. As a reader, when I start to notice those things, they are immediate red flags. And this book has some pretty, intense red flags. So one of the things is that she has to undergo basically like plastic surgery, but like magical plastic surgery, in order to be a better assassin. And it like makes her more attractive and gives her bigger boobs. And she's 16, like, especially because the beginning of the book spends a lot of time being like, you may have heard she's really hot, but like, she's not that attractive looking. And then they like flip that and reverse it. I'm like, oh, actually we gave her magical plastic surgery and now she's got big boobs and milky skin and a symmetrical nose. Cool, like, why? So that was frustrating. I did not enjoy that. The other big thing for me, and I take Cindy's numerous points that there are some other like really weird edgelord writing things going on. I don't let those trip me up as much because I just don't pay attention to them or I don't catch them as quickly. And I'm just like, oh yeah, that's kind of weird, but like I keep going. The thing that tripped me up more though with this is like, I think there's some just like characterizations, that's the word I'm looking for, some characterizations of folks in this book that I would call problematic. And that was not fun. It's like one of those things like, I did this when I was reading Twilight in high school. I was so in it when I read it. I was so in it and I was such a stan. And then the minute I was done with it, my brain turned back on in its full critical capacity and was like, there was some stuff in there that wasn't great. In fact, it was quite bad. I did kind of the same thing here. Like I was in it, I was loving it. The book was so good. It was the favoriteest thing I read. And then like when I finished it and like put some distance between it, I was like, ooh, wait, actually, that's not great. So I don't know. I really don't know. I go back and forth with this. I have heard multiple folks accurately describe Jay Kristoff as a problematic writer, both because he has said some things about the criticism coming from different reviewers of color that are questionable AF, and I am not the right person to define those people's experiences. Read with Cindy does like have receipts and talks about it in her video, so again, linking that below. He also has done a whole other series that's gotten some justifiable criticism for the way that he portrays different cultures. Let's just leave it at that. So I knew all of that going into it, and I think there's still something enjoyable about this book series. If you love this, I am not trying to like fight you. I'm not trying to shit on the thing that you love, okay? Like I really am not, because I also enjoyed myself reading this. But I have weird feelings about it because there are some things that came up as huge red flags for me. So I think my rating is somewhere between a 3.5 stars and a 4. You know, like there's still a lot to love here. And I didn't spend a lot of time talking about that because I got really distracted by the stuff that annoyed me. That's my big takeaway for you, is like, please continue to question things if something makes you a little uncomfortable, like this one did. So they're my messy feelings. Even though I think this is somewhat of a problematic read, I still really am invested in seeing where it goes, and I'm at least going to keep it long enough to see how I feel about the rest of the series overall. So for now, it's staying with me. The next thing I read was Captain by Lauren Rowe on Kindle Unlimited. And I picked that up because Jess at Peace Love Books XO really enjoyed it, and I've kind of been wanting to try out more Kindle romances. So Captain is the second book in the Morgan Brothers series, though I still think it's enough of a standalone that you can just experience it as you will. But it follows Ryan and Tessa. They're a romantic couple. His full name is Ryan Ulysses Morgan, so his initials are RUM, which is why he also goes by the nickname Captain. Buckle up, because nicknames are a huge thing for this family, and it gets weird. But he meets Tessa at a bar one night after recently breaking up with his girlfriend. Tessa is kind of in disguise, dressed up as a flight attendant because she wanted to kind of create an alternate persona to help her get back on the horse. They hit it off, except Ryan's ex-girlfriend barges in and, like, verbally berates him. Tessa takes off. So it's kind of a weird, like, Cinderella at the ball jilting. And it turns out that Tessa is actually working for the guy who Ryan's little sister is gonna marry, and their lives intersect again after months, and they've both been thinking about the other person, and it is very much a comedy of errors in terms of them trying to reconnect because both sides feel like they have been wronged deeply. So there's a little bit of mutual groveling. I can tell you that the smutty scenes are epically good. I gave this novel 3 stars though, because even though I thought the smut was fantastic, and I will definitely be checking out Lauren Rowe's other work because, wow. there are some things that just drove me insane about this novel that just really are kind of like my personal angsty writing criticisms. So if the things I'm about to mention don't bother you, you're gonna love it. Go for it. I still recommend Captain as a 3-star read, but this is apparently like a quirk of the entire Morgan Brothers series because, as I mentioned, they're very nickname heavy, and it's too much. It's too much for me. It really is. Also, the amount of repetition in this novel drove me up the wall. Like, characters would have a conversation, and then maybe like a chapter later, in conveying the point of that conversation to somebody else, they would replicate it dialogue line by dialogue line for this other person like a chapter away. No, it happened 2 pages ago. I do not need a blow-by-blow of this conversation again. It just really jolted me out of the reading experience. It did not help me feel the love for this book. So like, there were a lot of really awesome things. Like, Ryan and Tessa are such fun characters. Again, the smut, fantastic. I really do want to read more about the Morgan brothers, but I also have to go into the rest of those books knowing that like, there's some stuff that's just gonna annoy the living daylights out of me. So if those things don't annoy you or don't hit you too hard, then I highly recommend this as a romance series. If they do annoy you, I still kind of recommend it as a romance series because it was really fun and really smutty, and that's good. Captain, I'm obviously not gonna keep because that was a rental, but I don't think I'm gonna buy that one either. So then I totally switched gears on my reading and read Frog Music by Emma Donoghue. Emma Donoghue has written, I think her most high-profile other book is Room, which was also adapted into a movie starring Brie Larson. So I was kind of aware of her before, really thought this was going to be a great high-profile literary moment, and I gave this 2.5 stars. I struggled with this one. I almost DNF'd it multiple times. I was very disappointed that the character of Jenny Bonnet, who is like a supporting character, and I knew that going in, Jenny Bonnet is definitely somewhere in the realm of LGBTQIA+, but Emma Donoghue does not overly define in what way. So history sometimes reads Jenny Bonnet, who is a real person in San Francisco in the 1800s, as an early trans character, and in interviews, Emma Donoghue has said more that Jenny Bonnet, in her book, Frog Music, is intended to be more of just like a regular lesbian woman who was pushing conventions of the time by wearing pants. But she doesn't explicitly state any of this in the book. She's just quirky and a little weird and has magnetism. Like, her identity is so ill-defined in a way that I was really hoping for a better definition of Jenny and more care to be given to Jenny's character, because Jenny ends up just being like a catalyst and a plot pusher for the main character of this book, Blanche Bonan. Blanche Bonan is a burlesque performer in San Francisco in the 1890s during a epidemic. So I did not pay close enough attention to that, and that was not fun to read about during the given times. So that's on me, as is my entire struggles with this book. But she's in this really toxic relationship, and so Jenny ends up being like the catalyst to make Blanche realize a lot about her life, that this relationship is bad, that she should be a better mother, that she should maybe not be in her profession if it's treating her poorly. Like, these are the things that Jenny helps Blanche realize, and since you're only in Blanche's head, you get like even a really negative view of Jenny for making her have these realizations. And so I got really upset with how Blanche, and by extension Emma Donoghue, treats the character of Jenny, who I thought was by far the most redeeming part of this whole flippin' book. There is a whole index in the back of like musical compositions and where they come from and why they're important, because there's an excessive amount of lyrics quoted in this book. It was so distracting and obnoxious. So I did not enjoy the characters. They were unlikable characters to the point of just not even being interesting or intriguing, but just like terrible people. It was not the representation that I was hoping for, which is more about my own disappointment than anything that the author promised me. Obviously, I've made my feelings on this really clear and how disappointed I was. It's going in the no box. Okay, so the next book I read was again not on my Litland TBR, but was definitely part of my a major part of my reading experience for June, and that was for the Blackout buddy read hosted by Books with Shay. And so I read White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. Now that buddy read also had the book White Rage on its list, but that is something I'm still waiting on for the library. So even though I wasn't able to participate in that portion of the buddy read, that is something I still intend to read when it's available to me as a resource. But I tabbed the living daylights out of this book and highlighted it and annotated it, and I gave this a 4.5 stars. I understand, and I think part of why it's at that 4.5 stars is because I tried my best to listen to other people in the community about what made them uncomfortable about this book, and really took that into my reading practice as well. So that definitely affected my perception of this book, even though I still felt it was really valuable to me. And so in particular, I'm calling out here the book's use of the N-word, which made a lot of content creators, particularly Black content creators, feel uncomfortable or unwelcome in this book space. And I totally hear that and understand that logic and that discomfort. Some other content creators were not as bothered by this, so it's very much a personal choice, and I respect that difference. I also think that there's a lot of justifiable criticism about, since Robin DiAngelo is a white woman, and this is clearly a book targeted at a white audience, that a lot of people are concerned, and understandably so, that this is like the only book that white folks are going to read during this time, and that really we should be, if we're truly trying to grow and learn about how to be anti-racist, that we should be reading books from Black authors or other BIPOC identity, which I hear and I take that in, and I'm going to continue to explore that as a reader. However, for me, for the growth that I need to do and the tough self-work that I need to do, I think this was an excellent starting point. Please just, again, know the criticisms going in, take them in to your reading practice when you are doing things like tabbing and annotating. I still think this was a very valuable read for me in terms of giving myself tools, giving myself a starting point. But that's what it is. It's a starting point. This is not going to be where I stop. And so I think it was still something I'm very grateful to have read and grateful to have been part of a community read. So thank you again to Books with Shay for that. I would highly recommend going to the back of this book as a resource, because she has resources for continuing your education. And this is a pro tip for, I'm going to take this down because of the white balance issue, but that's a pro tip for me as somebody who has been a grad student for a very long time. If you found a book valuable on some level, like cull through the resources at the end, the bibliographies, the indexes, to see what this person used to make their arguments, because Robin DiAngelo very openly states that she is using a lot of Black and other POC authors' work to kind of build her own repertoire, and that she owes so much to that existing community to be able to write this book. And she cites them all in the back. So you can use her existing level of resources and kind of treat that as almost like a roadmap to start checking off boxes. I will be keeping this and probably revisiting it and retabbing it as I continue to learn and grow in this space. Next, I did another really small nonfiction read, and that is Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. So this is a really tiny little volume. It is like just over 100 pages in this edition. And so this was just like a really nice, pleasant read overall. It's very inspirational. It is exactly what it says it's going to be based on the title. It is Letters to an Aspiring Poet. I gave this 4.5 stars. I thought it was really inspirational if you are a writer, if you are a creative type at all. I felt like really comforted by the advice. It was so charming and just empowering and like soft. It was a nice soft read, but I really enjoyed this. I'm definitely keeping this 4.5 stars. And so the next thing I read was actually something that I ended up picking up for Litland, through a friend's recommendation. It was one of my challenges, but that is Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. So this is a fantasy YA standalone that takes place in the fictional land of Ostermere, and Elizabeth, our main character, is in training to be a warden. And the wardens are basically in charge of keeping sorcerers' grimoires in check. Like all books in this world, or all grimoires in this world are like classed from, you know, like a 1 to a category 10, and anything past like 6 is super dangerous and has the potential to become what's called a malefict, where it basically grows into a monster. And so wardens are there to protect the rest of Ostermere from these malefics or the dangers of the grimoires. But there are also sorcerers in this world, sorcerers who need to look at the grimoires for research, to understand their heritage, to, you know, function. So really magic and non-magic live side by side in this world. And Elizabeth is accused of a crime after something goes horribly wrong in her library. And she is basically from then on out trying to figure out who actually committed this crime and to restore her good name and to, you know, continue to protect her friends and communities from malefics. And it was such a cute adventure. It was so pleasant. There was a lot in this book that like never got an explanation for why things happened or how things happened, but my brain did not care. It was such a sweet read, such a fun read. I really enjoyed the pace of it, and it was just like a really pleasant, quick book. I gave it a 3.5 star rating because it was fun. It was fun, but I wasn't obsessed with it. I didn't love it. I did like this much more than Margaret Rogerson's other book, a sorcery or something, Enchantment of Ravens. That's what it is, an Enchantment of Ravens. So I did enjoy Sorcery of Thorns more. I think for me, this goes in the maybe box because I liked it, but I'm really trying to figure out whether or not I would ever want to reread it. And that's what is a huge defining factor for me when I am trying to keep or dismiss books from my life is, am I actually going to reread it? Should it stay on my shelves, or is this the kind of thing that I can just be happy to have read it? So maybe box. And then finally, the last thing I read in June. I'm sorry I've kept you here so long. There are probably like 5 of you left at this point. But the last thing I read was Janie Chang's The Library of Legends. And I really enjoyed this book. I also gave it 3.5 stars. What I really liked about this book was that it was a different time period within historical fiction than I read frequently. And I don't see a ton of fiction set within this time period, which is in the like late 1930s, set in China during the like war and invasion of China by Japan. So this follows several perspectives throughout the novel of these group of people who are all at university and have to evacuate Nanking, something that happened pretty commonly during that time period. And often folks would not only take what little they had with them, but were also transporting books and texts of cultural heritage. So it was really a lot about preserving the future of China at the time too. And so what made this book so interesting was that it has some like magical realism elements to it, where there was a lot of Chinese mythology interwoven and into the book in a way that felt really organic and interesting. And to me, those were the highlights of reading The Library of Legends, was the part where you see, you know, mythological folktales come to life, or gods made real for a brief period of time. So I wish there had honestly been more of that in this, because I think that's where this book really shines. Part of what made me give it 3.5 stars, which again is still a really good rating for me. It means that I would probably recommend this to the majority of you, or at least some of you, who, depending on your reading taste. But there is a love triangle that just felt like really ineffective in this novel because of the way it's constructed, and I can't say anything more than that without epically spoiling the book for you. But it just felt like when the couple that ends up being the final couple does in fact get together, it feels like really shallow, and it feels really lacking in the end because of the circumstances of the love triangle to begin with. But you are in, everybody's head within that triangle at some point, and so it's really interesting, multi-perspective, which was cool to read. And I did really enjoy this. I just think that like there were parts of it that I wish there were more of and parts that I wish that there were less, but that's just me as a reader. I still think this is a really good historical fiction and a really cool premise overall. So I think you should give this a try if you like historical fiction, or if you're really interested in reading about China in the late 1930s. I think this is going to go in the maybe box for me because, again, I am just not sure if I'm going to reread it. Happy to have read it in the first place. Not sure if I'm going to reread it. So that's it. Those are all the books I read in June. Thank you for sticking with me for this long. I read more than I thought I was going to read, but it was a really interesting and engaging reading month. Even if some of these numbers, like I've gone back and forth on what I'd like to rate them, that was still like a super interesting experience for me. So I hope you had fun watching this, and I will look forward to checking in with you again in July to talk about what I read. But in the meantime, thanks for spending some time with me. I hope you have a fantastic reading day. Like and subscribe if you would like to know more about me or this channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!